In 1998, Aprilia threw its hat in the ring in the big bore sports bike market with the RSV Mille. And at the time, it had some of the stiffest competition around, the likes of Suzuki's TR1000R, and Ducati had what some regard the most beautiful bike in the world, the 996 and 998, that carries 916 lineage, and Aprilia releases one of these. So needless to say, it had its work cut out for it. Now that was well over 20 years ago, and has time been kind to the RSV? Has it been judged too harshly? On this vid, I'm going to go through why you should buy one and also why you shouldn't. Hey everyone, welcome to Roads of Oz. My name is Matt, and on this episode we're looking at Aprilia's RSV Mille. So the Aprilia first appeared in showrooms back in 1998, and it was a Rotax sourced 998cc V-twin which produced about 128 horsepower and approximately 100 Newton meters at 7,250 RPMs. So what does that mean for you? Well, it was a torquey beast from fairly down low. Once you got it above about 6,000 RPMs, it really started to take off. Now it's an aluminium alloy chassis, adjustable upside down suspension. Now I'll either shower at the front, or if you shelled out a bit extra for the R version, they were the Öhlins forks. The first changes were made in 2001 when the fairing was restyled. So the later models had an 18 litre fuel tank compared to the first ones had a 20 litre steel fuel tank, and the shocks on the standard and the R model were revised. They are still Showa and Öhlins respectively. And in 2002 the bikes received further updates, such as the front brakes were updated to a monoblock system, which gave a better braking performance. In 2003, the gear ratios were revised to give it a slightly closer ratio gearbox. The exhaust system was changed, and the tailpiece and front mudguard was slightly revised. From 2004, the Mille was replaced by the RSV-R and the RSV Factory, and they were affectionately known as the Gen 2, but for this episode, we're focusing on the Gen 1. Now, in most cases, you will find most of the bikes available in Australia are the standard version. When the Mille was released in 1999, even though it had a massive amount of upgrades, there were about, from my information, approximately only 25 were brought into the country. But it's definitely a higher spec. It had Öhlins suspension, an Öhlins steering damper, the Oz rims, there was carbon fibre bits and pieces on it, and also there was a shorter subframe because it only had provisions for a solo seat. Now, there are some rare versions out there. You've got the RSV Mille SP. They produced the SP in order to get to meet the requirements for superbikes, and so only 150 were produced, and to my knowledge, none were imported into Australia. There are some cool replicas. There's the Haga replica, which only about 300 were made, coming with some racing kit. And there was also later on an Edwards replica in MotoGP livery, and it came with a whole host of functions, but it was much more expensive. And I am aware there were some brought into Australia because I had the opportunity to buy one, but it was just out of my budget. It was a good 10 grand above a later model Gen 2. So yeah, I ended up getting the Gen 2, but if I'd known what I know now, I probably should have bought the Edwards replica. It's a good looking bike with a great sound. Just have a listen to this. Being a taller person, I really do like the RSV Mille because it is a taller rider's bike, especially sports bikes. You've virtually got to be a jockey, but these ones, you can be a bit taller. Another strong point is these are quite cheap to purchase. A quick look on the internet, here in Australia, they started at 5 grand and they went up from there. The price for a well-sorted one like this goes for as little as $7,500, and even though the purchase price is cheap, that's the only thing that is. They're not that desirable. In all honesty, that's the case here. They're not as popular as a Ducati. For example, a Ducati of the same year model as one of these commands 2 to 3 times the purchase amount of the Aprilia. Even though it is a cheap bike to purchase, that's where it stops. Running costs are quite expensive. For example, because it's 1000cc, you find insurance and rego is quite expensive. Recently, I tried pricing an insurance policy for one of these, and to insure it for market value, which it sees at $6,000, was a $2,000 premium coupled with a $1,000 excess. So they're not really worth fully insuring. Now, parts for these are a mixed bag. They're either very easy to get or no longer made. A lot of the body panels for any of the Gen 1s are just no longer made, so you're really sourcing the second-hand market. If you do drop it, you've got to find yourself a good panel beater and spray painter then get it looking as good as new. And insurance companies know this. They know you drop one of these, they can't get parts for it, so they're going to write the bike off. And that's the problem you have. The cost of fixing these will exceed its market value. Also, the dealership network here in Australia is pretty sparse. Now, all your major cities are covered, but once you go out further, there is not many places that will comfortably work on these, and it's another problem we have here in Australia. A lot of dealerships, once the bike's over 10 years old, unless you're a regular customer, they're not going to want to touch this bike, and that's the case here. Now, there are some workshops that specialize in Aprilia, and my advice is do your research before you buy one of these and make sure you have that support, because it's very important. You really need someone with that product knowledge. Even new, the rear brake wasn't that great and it got a lot of bad write-ups. It's far worse by today's standards, and a lot of Mille riders will ride around it and just ignore the rear brake. Problem is, they ignore it that much, it virtually doesn't do anything until you're virtually stomping on it. And yeah, I've got to push a long way down. Also, you know what they say about Aprilia riders with big feet? They're going to melt on the exhaust. So make sure your exhaust has some sort of heat shield, because your shoe quite easily gets caught on there. Especially when you're riding with a boot, you'll find it gets caught on there quite easily. So you will melt your shoe if you don't have that heat shield on it. So what goes wrong? Well, the Aprilia sadly is what's the best way to put this? Your Aprilia is a total cliche of a bike when it comes to attain electrics. And this one suffers from a lot of electrical problems, starting with bad cabling from the battery to the starter solenoid failure, sprag failure. This is a common issue with the RSV Mille. The sprag clutch is responsible for starting the engine, and if it fails, the engine just won't start. The starter relay can fail, which causes the bike to not start or stall while riding. There's a brown and white connector that's known to corrode, which can cause electrical issues, but I'd be checking all your connectors. The side stand switch can fail, which can cause the bike to stall while riding, and there are some cases of between 2000 and 2001 models had issues with the earth wire shorting on the fuel pump in through the tank fitting. The plastic fuel line quick disconnect fitting was recalled, so it should have a replacement. If not, get one done as soon as possible. You can check the VIN number with one of the dealers and they can tell you if it's done or not. The vent tube inside the tank can disintegrate at nipple, so confirm replacements are in or replace them ASAP. The intake fuel pump hose splits, so confirm it has been replaced or inspect and replace ASAP. Now, a lot of the issues for these bikes actually have aftermarket solutions. People like AP Racing have a lot of aftermarket fixes for the bike. In all honesty, can probably be overcome if you keep the battery in good condition. Now, the problem with this bike is, and we'll get into it a bit later, these things run hot, and electrics and batteries in particular don't like being too hot and will fail accordingly. All right, so what's it like to ride? Well, you hear all this bullshit about how wonderful these things are to ride, and they are, on the proviso you know what you're doing. So to get the best out of these things, you really need to ride them with a bit of authority. What I mean by that is you don't need to thrash them, you just need to accelerate with some conviction. And when you put it into corners, be sure about it. Don't go in all wobbly and unsure, because it will punish you accordingly. So coming up the corners, you line the thing up and punt it through. Manhandling these things give you much better results than timid input via the throttle and steering. At low speeds, the throttle is quite snatchy and jerky and just miserable. Not only that, these things do tend to get hot. So yeah, that warm sensation or the heat coming up through these and trying to melt your privates. Hell no. Why would you want to do that to yourself? Stop-start traffic, it's absolutely horrible. Now, if your daily commuting is open roads and beautiful countryside and you're not getting caught in traffic, by all means use it as a daily commuter. But be aware, every time you park this, Aprilias have the scariest side stand I've ever come across. And it's not uncommon for you to see low speed scratches down the side fairing on the left hand side, and it's not because they've dropped it, it's because the bike's fallen over at some point because it's on some uneven ground or they just haven't parked it up properly. It is truly a scary experience with it. So riding this bike at night, look, front headlights are amazing. They do a very good job, even in dark country roads. I found the headlight and the high beam in particular lit up the road perfectly well, which is so much better than some of the other models of its same era. Now the LCD dash is not modern by today's standards, but it does have some good information. Problem is, on a sunny day, I found it hard to read. Now I'm not sure if it's because of my height and the angle I was looking at, but I did find it hard to read. Of a night time though, it is well illuminated, and I've got to say, I do love the tachometer smack bang in the middle of the dash. It looks pretty good. If you want a cheap entry-level bike for track days, these aren't too bad. They sound phenomenal, but if you're after something cheap to buy and cheap to run, steer clear of one of these. They do need regular type of maintenance. If you stay on top of it, these are an excellent bike. You let things go too long with these, it will bite you on the ass, something chronic. So before you even think about buying these, firstly, find a mechanic that knows how to work on these and understands the aftermarket parts and where he can get all the parts. Make sure he knows where he can get parts for these when the problems arise. 2, buy yourself a battery tender. A good battery tender is less than $100 and is mandatory for one of these. If you're going to leave the bike parked up for a few weeks, you're best having the battery tender on it anyway, so when it starts, you've got a good strong battery. The only thing Italian V-twins hate more than feeble riding is a weak battery. Now the third thing is, get yourself a service manual. Now, even if you're not going to do the work yourself, I still recommend you get something like this, like the Haynes service manual. But it actually comes with a bit of a maintenance schedule. Don't know if you can see that, but very handy and just gives you a bit of an understanding, and also might encourage you to have a crack at a few of the simpler things yourself. And definitely get involved with some of the forums like rsvr.net and Aprilia owner forums. They're a wealth of knowledge and it might help you get through some of the pesky problems these may have. All right, so there you have it. These bikes are brilliant yet flawed. They're great value, but can be expensive. They're just such a contradiction at times. And it's what you hear the saying that you never see a motorcycle outside the front of a psychiatrist's office. Well, only one of these bikes might be the exception to the rule, but I'll leave that up to you. So let us know in the comments, would it be something that you own or would you just steer clear of it? Anyway, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out some other review videos of pre-loved bikes.